on Jerusalem Dateline. This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the U.S. sponsors a major conference presenting a united front against Iran.
There was not a defender of Iran in the room.
Plus, CBN News goes to the front lines in the battle against ISIS, where Christian aid workers stand in the gap.
God is sending a mighty river into Syria, this spirit, to change things.
And the Copper Scroll Project. Could this be the key to finding the treasures of the Second Temple? All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sponsored an international conference along with Poland that targeted Iran's threat to the Middle East and to the world. The conference came while Iran is celebrating the 40th anniversary of its Islamic Revolution. 40 years after Iran became an Islamic republic, the world is standing up to this major global threat. Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo joined other world powers to confront Iran's growing influence in a major conference. Pompeo says there's no peace without confronting Iran.
You can't achieve peace and stability in the Middle East without confronting Iran. It's just not possible. There are malign influence in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Syria, and Iraq.
Pompeo said the nearly 70 nations at the conference agreed on the Iranian danger.
There was not a defender of Iran in the room. No country spoke out and denied any of the basic facts that we all had laid out about Iran, the threat it poses, the nature of the regime. It was unanimous.
Recently, Iran threatened to level Tel Aviv. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded that would be the end of the Islamic Republic.
I don't ignore the threats of the Iranian regime, but neither am I intimidated by them. If this regime makes the awful mistake of trying to destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa, it will not succeed. However, this would be the last anniversary of the revolution that they celebrate. They should take this into account.
Iran at first dismissed the conference, but when a deadly terror attack killed dozens of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the regime suggested the world powers are behind it. Is it no coincidence that Iran is hit by terror on the very day that Warsaw Circus begins? Netanyahu said the conference marked a first, with Israel standing alongside its Arab neighbors in the Middle East.
Yesterday was a historical turning point. In a room of some 60 foreign ministers and representatives of dozens of governments, an Israeli prime minister and the foreign ministers of the leading Arab countries stood together and spoke with unusual force, clarity, and unity against the common threat of the Iranian regime.
Those attending the conference in Poland want to stop Iran's expansion in the Middle East and to blunt the leading sponsor of terror in the world. One place in the Middle East that faces the danger of Iran is in northeast Syria. The people of this area have nearly defeated the Islamic State after a long battle, but now they face the threat of Iranian-backed Shiite militias on their border. We spoke with a spokesman of the Syrian Democratic Forces about this menace when we visited northeast Syria.
The Iranians, and with the support that they are providing to the Syrian regime and with the thousands of foreign militias who they brought here and who are now waiting on the southern shores of the Euphrates River, who are ready to invade those places anytime the U.S. is going to leave. Of course, they are making a threat for the world people and even for the Christians.
The Syrian Democratic Forces have been at the forefront in the fight against the Islamic State. ISIS once controlled an area the size of Great Britain across Syria and Iraq. Now they've been pushed back to barely 2 square kilometers. And Defense Department officials say the end of the terror group's reign is only days away. CBN contributor Chuck Holton is on the front lines in Syria and brings us this report about how one Christian ministry is bringing practical aid and spiritual hope.
Here in southern Syria, within sight of the Iraqi border, U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces have set the stage for the last stand of the ISIS caliphate in that country. The fighting has been brutal, and while the SDF have tried to evacuate civilians from the battle space, ISIS has thwarted those efforts by using up to 10,000 civilians as human shields. For those who do escape, however, their ordeal is far from over.
So this is the Syrian Defense Forces checkpoint about a mile from what they call the forward line of troops, the front lines against ISIS that are off that direction. They have walked to this point after getting across ISIS lines. These women are in terribly bad shape. Some of them are wounded. The children are obviously dehydrated, malnourished, and sick. And they're receiving some kind of initial treatment here. The difficulty is that they've had a problem with many of these women actually wearing suicide vests, and they had 5 blow themselves up in one day. And so it's kind of a tense situation being here. They've already been checked by some of the female SDF soldiers, but we've still got to, just be careful and hope that these women love their children enough that they're not going to do anything stupid like that.
But between the front line and the nearest refugee camp, there's nothing but more than 200 miles of arid Syrian desert. No food, water, or shelter. Into this gap is stepping a group of Christians who make it their mission to travel to front lines around the globe and help people at their point of greatest need. They are the Free Burma Rangers, and their founder, Dave Eubank, has been working on the front lines in this region since 2015.
God is sending a mighty river into Syria of his spirit to change things. And I said, we're not a river, man, we're a drop. And he said, we're all drops in God's rain, and it forms a river. And you and I may not live to see the day of change, but it's coming, because God cares about these people.
All right, we're here to rescue.
A former U.S. Army Special Forces officer, Eubank has seen much of war. So have his ethnic medics, who grew up in the conflict zone in Burma and have used their skills here to save many lives. From Dave's perspective on the ground, he says pulling out of Syria would be the worst thing the U.S. can do.
The military side, they've done a great job, and they're doing a great job. They need to stay and complete that, and stay to keep this space open. But humanitarian, there's a huge gap. The humanitarian gap from the front line to, for example, the nearest hospital, 4 hours. So you could be shot up there and then take a whole day to cross, another day to get here, then 4 more hours before you get to a hospital. So what the U.S. could do, practically, is set up field hospitals to support the Syrian Democratic Forces to improve their ability to save lives.
Those who arrive here are often gravely injured, like this taxi driver whose home was hit by a bomb as he and his family were sleeping.
At 3 in the morning, our house was destroyed, and there were 23 of us inside.
Only Salam, one son, and a daughter made it out alive. But even before that tragedy, life inside the Islamic Caliphate was unbearable.
Life was terrible in there. We had to carry water from far away, and we ate grass to stay alive. ISIS wanted money to let us leave, but we had no money, and finally, they let us go.
You might think it's crazy for a group of civilians to venture so close to the front lines, but this is no ordinary missions team or a group of tourists. These are highly trained medics and lots of prior military experience here that kind of makes them uniquely qualified to do the kind of work they're doing, addressing that humanitarian gap between the front lines where people are escaping ISIS and the first refugee camps, because there really isn't anything to help those people between those 2 points.
This is what we're made to do. We like it. This is the kind of work we can do. And we're not too afraid of the front line or fighting. And we have the skills, but all of that is only useful and only workable if led by God.
These men surrendered to SDF forces from the conflict area and are suspected ISIS fighters. Be that as it may, they are sick, hungry, and some were wounded. So the FBR team gave them water and medicine. And then Eubank said a prayer.
Lord Jesus, please bless all these men. Let them call on your name. In Mosul, we lost a lot of friends. I was wounded 4 times. I lost my translator. 30 guys I knew well were killed. 3 of my team were wounded. In the face of that, why would we help them? Because God sent us, and we know I'm not perfect. Those that'll raise their hand and say, pull me out, I want to pull them out. That's redemption. That's how things change. And this is the first time I said I forgive ISIS. That's God's work in my heart. That's God's work in my heart.
From southern Syria, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Coming up, have these Israeli scientists come up with a cure for cancer? Or is it a claim too good to be true? Find out when we come back. An Israeli company made headlines recently when the chairman of the board told the Jerusalem Post they could have a cure for cancer within a year. CBN News interviewed one of the scientists, and as CBN Health reporter Lori Johnson reports, There's more to the story.
Advanced Evolution Biotechnologies, or AB, began its business in 2000. 4 years ago, founder and CEO Dr. Ilan Murad and his partner, Dr. Hanan Itzaki, started research on a cure for cancer.
We didn't want to have another drug like everyone else that would give relief to some cancer patients and then the cancer would come back. We wanted really to cure something like antibiotics.
The concept is based on the same strategy used to combat AIDS. The patient is given a cocktail or mix of medications designed to prevent the disease from becoming resistant to any one drug.
Because, you know, HIV is very mutagenic creature, same as cancer. This is the problem with cancer, that is very mutagenic, and these mutations help the cancer escape the therapy.
Here in this tiny lab in Ness Ziona, Israel, these two scientists came up with a theory they hope will cure cancer. They call it Mutato. That stands for multi-target toxin.
The main thing here is multiple targeting. Instead of attacking one target at a time, we connect together several peptides and we attack several targets at a time. And because of that, the cancer won't be able, statistically, won't be able to escape the therapy, and this is what happened with AIDS. And this is what would happen here in cancer.
And they point out, since this cocktail specifically targets cancer cells, it is not as harmful to healthy ones.
The other thing is, because of these targeting peptides are connected together, and there's what we call the avidity effect, the side effect would be much, much, much lower. So it would be like an antibiotic.
Murad says if scientists could come up with 100 different peptides, they believe various combinations could treat each kind of cancer.
Each patient would get his own mutator that would fit perfectly his cancer. He would have almost no side effects, and in no time he would be cured completely, because the cancer cells would be completely killed, every one of them.
Murad says they have 5 peptides in the preclinical stage. When the article came out, it basically caught the medical community by surprise, because AB's experiments have been limited and not published in medical journals. CBN News approached Dr. Charles Geyer, Associate Director for Clinical Research at VCU Massey Cancer Center, who was one of many that urged caution. He said, "We all hope that a cure for cancer will be found, but cancer is a complex family of diseases, and there's a history of similar claims that have unfortunately spread false hope to many patients and their loved ones. This news is based on limited information from the company and its researchers, and the results from their preclinical experiments have not been published in any peer-reviewed academic journals. I would approach this news with healthy skepticism and also remind people that it typically takes years to translate promising preclinical research from the laboratory to evaluation in the clinic." Murad said he was surprised by the criticism.
At least give me the credit. Ask me what is the mechanism of our mutator, or read carefully the first article in the Jerusalem Post to see what I really said.
Murad said they need funding to move their research along faster and would like to collaborate with larger pharmaceutical companies. He also made clear the one goal on his mind.
I don't care about the money. I want to cure cancer patients.
Coming up, the Copper Scroll Project. Could this be a key to finding the lost treasures of the Second Temple? Have you ever wondered what happened to the treasures of the temple when Jerusalem was conquered by the Romans nearly 2,000 years ago? A new book called The Copper Scroll Project gives some clues about what could be the biggest treasure find in history. We talked with the author, Shelley Neese, in our studio. Well, Shelley, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you
for being here. You've written the Copper Scroll Project. It's been a long-term project. Why did you write it?
Originally, I started out, I met the Jim Barfield. He's the explorer who's in the book. I met him at a conference and I decided to just write one story about this explorer kind of on this amazing quest. That was back in 2009. It was just in the beginning. And so that one article turned into another article, and then eventually things just evolved so much that I realized I actually had a book on my hands. So there's so much that just out the gate, a lot of people who have never heard of the Copper Scroll, I feel like there's a lot of skepticism around what the Copper Scroll even is. But we know that the Copper Scroll, all scholars agree that it's an authentic document that points to
treasure of the temple, right?
Right. Well, so this Copper Scroll itself doesn't use a lot of temple words, except for we know that it's such copious amounts of gold and silver and talents that it suggests that it could only be connected to the temple treasury. There wouldn't have been any other place that would have had that kind of wealth. And then in certain places, the Copper Scroll does use words like sanctified or vessels a couple of times, and once priestly vestments. I'm haunted by the Copper Scroll. I'm haunted by the idea of it. And so that's the thing. Once I started studying the Copper Scroll, I just couldn't kind of kill that hope that there might still be part of the temple treasury out there.
Now found in one of the caves near Qumran.
Exactly. So the Copper Scroll was one of the few times it was found in Cave 3. As you know, after 1948, archaeologists in Bedouin were racing the clock against each other to find more Dead Sea Scroll caves. The black market was being flooded with Dead Sea Scroll fragments, Dead Sea Scrolls less fragmentary. In this particular case, it was archaeologists that found it. It was led by a French explorer, a French archaeologist, with other Bedouins working on the team. And really, they found Cave 3, and it was kind of a depressing situation because it was a lot, the cave wall or the cave roof had collapsed in antiquity, destroying most of the scroll jars that were inside the cave, which were several. And therefore, the scrolls were just in fragments. Some of them were in rat nest in the cave. I mean, really in a dilapidated state. It took about 10 days to excavate Cave 3. In the last few hours of that last day, they noticed what looked to be another niche or another part of the multi-chamber complex. And they decide to chip through this one barricade. And turns out, I mean, almost like a false wall to a castle secret chamber, behind it, a man-made shelf, and on it rested the Copper Scroll.
Which was unlike many of the other scrolls, correct? Since it was copper and...
Definitely.
Yeah.
It really, not only unique to the Dead Sea Scroll collection, but there is no other ancient metal document like it anywhere.
And contained sort of like X marks the spot kind of information?
Exactly. It is a treasure map. It's a verbal treasure map. So 12 columns, over 60 locations. You're getting very specific directions. You know, it'll read like in the valley under the ruins, dig here, and you'll find 17 talents. So it's giving all of these very architectural details that if you're looking for biblical commentary or one of the books of the Bible or how the Essenes lived, you're not going to find it in the Copper Scroll. To me, what's most interesting about the Copper Scroll is speculating who wrote it. How did they get these treasures out of the temple and manage to hide them? You know, so to me, just doing a little background research on the origins of the Copper Scroll has just informed my own faith so much in terms of what first century Jerusalem looked like. I really feel like Christians and Jews, I mean, the more we learn about first century Jerusalem and the different sects and what was going on and the political pressures, the more that we can understand our own faiths as well.
How did that feed your faith and fuel your faith?
Partially just putting me in the context of the world that Jesus was walking in, and probably even closer, the world that John the Baptist was walking in. And also the Essenes, you know, they really felt like they were living in the end times. And so to me, the Copper Scroll really, it puts meat on those bones, because here we are these temple priests that have somehow managed to have this covert operation of bringing temple treasures, secreting them out of the temple, knowing that the Romans are about to destroy it. And so it just is able to put me in that time and place of, here are these people who felt such a dramatic shift was about to happen in the world that they were willing to risk this operation.
How has this affected your faith?
Tremendously. I mean, for one, it brings me to Israel a lot, so that's always beneficial for any of our faiths. But I can't even tell you, so much of Israel's history, Israel's modern history, its wars, what it's going through now, is getting to see God's hand at work in the world today. So it's getting to see almost as if we're having new chapters of the Bible written before us.
What do you want people to take away from this book?
I want people to learn about first century Jerusalem, about Judaism, about Christianity, and really bring them back to that place of birth of their own faith. And that's what I want. I want them to just see their own faith through a new lens and for it to be a teaching tool for them.
Well, Shelley, congratulations on this. It's been great to be with you. It's a fascinating story.
It's an honor to be here.
Up next, a plea to pray for the Christians of Northeast Syria and all the peoples of that region. The announcement by President Trump to pull U.S. forces out of Northeast Syria frightened many of the people in that area. They're praying that God will intervene in their situation. Here's why.
Was in the house. There were a group of people with weapons that entered our neighborhood and they were stealing. So my cousin went out and asked them, "What are you doing?" So the man with weapons attacked my cousin's house and shot and killed his son.
Turkish President Erdogan has threatened a similar campaign into Northeast Syria.
We have seen and we had reports about several cases of kidnapping, killing, stealing the property of the Christians, or kidnapping them, asking for ransom, or killing them.
Please pray for these people, this region, and the future of one of the most strategic places on earth, from the Tigris to the Euphrates, at this time in history. Please do pray for the people of Northeast Syria. We met with many of them and found them to be warm, hospitable, and folks just like you and me. Yet they're facing a life-threatening situation. Also this week, we'd like to thank the Daystar Network for carrying Jerusalem Dateline. We're excited about this opportunity to report to you here from Jerusalem, Israel, and the Middle East, and to be like the sons and daughters of Issachar, who, like the Bible says, understood the times. Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.